Shana Tova. This past April marked 80 years since the liberation of the concentration camps. 80 years since American and British soldiers first entered places like Buchenwald or Bergen-Belsen and came face to face with the landscape of death. The world saw for the first time the photographs that seared themselves into our collective memory. Mountains of corpses, emaciated figures behind barbed wire, humanity reduced to shadows. And yet the year 1945 tells another story as well, another chapter in the history of the Jewish people. For even as the world stood stunned by the scale of destruction, another quieter story began to unfold, the story of the displaced persons camps. I've long been fascinated by the DP camps that sprang up almost overnight on the very site where life had seemed to end. Think about it. 250,000 Jews who had survived the Shoah. They had nowhere to go. Liberation meant walking out of one set of barbed wire gates only to walk through another. Freedom, yes, with no homes, with no families, and no clear future. Dr. Hadassah Rosensaft, whose yahrzeit we observed this evening, a physician and survivor of Bergen-Belsen, later recalled, there was no ecstasy, no joy at our liberation. We'd lost our families, our homes, no place to go, nobody to hug, nobody who was waiting for us. She said that we had been liberated from death and from the fear of death, but we were not free from the fear of life. And yet, that's not the story of the DP camps. On the very ground that had been a factory of death, Jews began to live again. Within days of liberation, Jews who had every reason to despair seized hold of their destiny. They built schools, Talmud Torahs, kindergartens. They opened up libraries, theaters, even orchestras. The camp had its own rabbinate, its own Jewish police force. It had a court. And where there at first were no baby strollers in the DP camps. Why? Because there were no babies. Within a year, there were weddings, births, and new families. Jewish life, spiritual, cultural, physical, was reborn in the very place where life had seemed to end. My friend Menachem Rosensaft, writing about his father's experience in the Bergen-Belsen DP camp, describes it this way. And thank you for your words, Menachem. For 5 years, from 1945 until 1950, this camp became one of the most vibrant Jewish communities in the world. Imagine that. On the very grounds where tens of thousands of Jews had perished, a Jewish community reemerged, phoenix-like, providing a haven, a respite, and a lifeline for thousands of survivors who had only recently seemed doomed. Intended as a temporary holding pen for people who had nowhere to go, the DP camps became something far more. They became the first cradle of Jewish renewal after the Shoah. Perhaps nothing captures this spiritual rebirth more powerfully than what became known as the survivors' Talmud. The Talmud itself was born in another catastrophic moment in Jewish history, when the temple lay in ruins and Jewish sovereignty was lost for the next 1900 years or so. Over a period of centuries, our sages, our rabbis, gathered these fragments together of our tradition and sort of edited them, turned them into a book, a portable sanctuary that could sustain the Jewish people for centuries of exile. Now, in the early months after liberation, there was not a single complete set of Talmud to be found in Europe. 10 years of Nazi terror had burnt them all. And so a group of rabbis came up with an audacious idea to print an entire set of Talmud in Germany, in the very land that had tried to destroy the Jewish people. With the help of the United States Army and the JDC, Jeffrey, it's nice to have you sitting behind me with your leadership of the JDC and organizing a tour for us while we were there in March. With the U.S. Army and the JDC, 50 full sets of the Talmud were published in a Heidelberg press that had once produced Nazi propaganda. Now think about that for a moment. Just 1 year after Auschwitz, Jews were printing Talmuds in Germany. The presses of Heidelberg, once used to spread anti-Semitic propaganda and the words of Hitler, were now rolling with words of Torah. The same ink, the same machines, transformed into instruments of holiness. Just as the rabbis created the Talmud to anchor Judaism after the destruction of the Talmud, the survivors' Talmud declared that Jewish life would not merely endure after the Shoah, it would flourish. This was not resilience. It was partly resilience. It was resurrection. And it leaves me with a question that I have pondered for years. What gave them the strength? How did the people who had lost everything find the will not only to live, but to learn, to marry, to bring children into the world, to print Talmuds of all things? This past March, on a Park Avenue synagogue trip to Israel, I received perhaps the most profound answer to this question I have ever heard, and experienced one of the most powerful, formative moments of my many, many visits and time spent in Israel. Our group, some of who are here, entered the library of the Himmelfarb School in Jerusalem, one of the country's leading religious Zionist institutions, where we were met and greeted by Rabbi Jeremy Yirmi Stavitsky. For 23 years, he led this extraordinary school as its principal before stepping down to return to his first love, teaching. He's a quiet, humble man. He stood before us that day carrying a grief that seemed to hang in the air, as if the walls themselves of the library were absorbing it. The usual energy of a school library was gone. A sacred, almost mournful silence settled over the room as we waited for him to speak. Rabbi Yirmi told us about the price Israel's many wars have exacted on his school community. 90 Himmelfarb students have fallen in battle since 1969. 10 of those losses have come since October 7th. Among them were Hirsch Goldberg Poland, Honor Shapiro, Ben Zussman, names we know. There's a beautiful picture that you can find on the internet of the three of them in tefillin in their school, davening. Went viral during the war, full of youth and promise. All three murdered by Hamas. I was overcome with emotion as I listened to him tell the story of the last 2 years and the shattering losses in his school's community. Rabbi Yirmi himself had suffered a devastating personal loss. His son, Yinon Fleischman, was killed at the start of the war, and all I wanted to know was, how does he go on? How does he teach? How does he lead? How does he comfort, inspire with such pain etched into his heart? And then he answered in a quiet, almost understated voice, capturing the ethos of this school. He told us, a person cannot live for himself. A person must live in a way that gives meaning to his or her life and must always ask where he can contribute to the world. And finally, Rav Yirmi opened the book that he held in his hand. It wasn't a Talmud. It wasn't a Hebrew Bible or any other of the sacred texts that line the walls of the library. It was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he read the passage where Frankl quotes Nietzsche, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." And those words, read to us in that place from that man, have remained with me. I felt in that moment what it means to actually choose life, to search for meaning even amid grief, to root yourself so deeply in your why that you can bear almost anyhow. And for so many of us, the experience with Rabbi Yirmi was the emotional centerpiece of this journey. We left the school transformed, for that moment was really much more than a lesson. It was a summons, and that summons is not new. The summons to choose our why is actually rooted deep in our biblical tradition. It echoes from the very first words of the book of Leviticus. The word vayikra, and God called, is written, if we were to open up the Torah, you would see it. It's written with a tiny, almost hidden aleph. And without that aleph, the word would say vayikar, which means he happened upon. And the difference between the two is actually everything. Vayikra suggests a call, a deliberate summons. Vayikar suggests, well, more chance. And to see the world as mere chance is to believe that history is somehow random. Events, just a coincidence. And that is not the Jewish way. That's why the aleph in Vayikra is small. An aleph is nearly silent. And this one is actually almost invisible. The Torah is telling us that God's presence isn't always as dramatic as the call at Sinai or the splitting of the sea. Sometimes that call will be quiet. It will be subtle. It will be hidden. It will require us to actually look for it, to listen for it. For those who are attentive, it's there. For those who ignore it, it can be missed entirely. And so we are left with a choice. If we close our eyes and our ears, Vayikra becomes Vayikar. We drift through life as if everything is just happenstance. But if we open our eyes, if we direct our ears, we will hear the call. A call to live with purpose, with intention, and with meaning. And that's the question that Leviticus places before us. Will we live lives of Vayikra, lives of calling, or lives of Vayikar, left to the winds of chance? Now, the rabbis pick up on this language of Leviticus, and they express the idea in a beautiful midrash. They taught, based on a verse in Proverbs, that a person should always live their lives as if they are at the helm, like the captain of a ship, like a ship tossed on a stormy sea. We can let it drift. We can be carried by currents, oblivious to where that ship might land, or we can take the wheel, stand at the helm, steer through the storm, steer through danger, through all that threatens to overwhelm us until we bring the ship safely home. Now, history has shown us what happens when Jews are not at the helm of their own destiny. And in keeping with the Midrash's nautical image, the fate of a few 20th century Jewish ships will tell the story with heartbreaking clarity. The St. Louis turned back from Cuba, from the United States in 1939. Its passengers left with nowhere to go but back to Germany. The Patria blown up in the Haifa harbor in 1940. The Struma abandoned and drifting in the Black Sea in 1942 with nowhere to go, torpedoed and sunk. 768 lives lost, one survivor. Together, these ships delivered a single brutal message that without a Jewish state, Jews would forever be surplus, unwanted, nowhere to go. Today, friends, there are no surplus Jews. There is one place where every Jew has a home. Israel exists because our people chose to steer, not drift. Because the generations before us, they claimed destiny, not accident. And they refused to be passengers in history's storm. And this summer, we saw that spirit come alive. When war broke out with Iran, there were images showing birthright kids and onward kids who were leaving Israel on boats from Tel Aviv to Cyprus. Now, what it looked like on these boats was like spring break, right? Search the images. They were dancing, they were drinking, there was music playing, they were swimming. I don't judge them. I really don't. It is disorienting and frightening to be in Israel when sirens go off. No question about it. But the pictures and the contrasting pictures and stories were striking because at the very same moment, there were Israelis who were desperate to return. And I imagine these two ships passing in the Mediterranean. The writer Yaakov Katz described his journey. Stranded in Cyprus, he boarded a tugboat with 8 others bound for Haifa. Among them were farmers hurrying back to their fields, business owners racing back to their shops, and young men just out of the army eager to put their uniforms back on. Nobody asked if it was safe. They simply came home. They ran not from Israel, but to Israel, not away from danger, but towards home. Now, this is the inversion of Jewish history. Once Jews crowded ships trying to flee Europe, begging for a land that would take them. Today, Jews crowd ships to come home, to defend their land, to defend their people, to claim their destiny. Now, I, like so many of you, almost 2 years later, continue to live and struggle with the aftershocks of October 7th. The ever-growing waves of anti-Semitism, the lies and half-truths about Israel and the Gaza war, the brutality of war, the accusations of starvation and genocide. I feel the sting of abandonment by allies who long benefited from the loyalty and partnership of the Jewish community in their own struggles. And I carry the heartbreak of knowing that hostages still remain in Gaza, that the brightest and the bravest of our people have put their lives on hold to serve hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days of reserve duty, and that too many have given their lives defending the Jewish state and the Jewish people. It is pervasive, it is constant, and it is exhausting. And yet, in my own moments of darkness, when it feels as if I have no control and I cannot see a way that we will possibly reach the other side, I look to our brothers and sisters in Israel, those who are fighting the fight on so many fronts. The past 2 years have given us countless examples of Israelis who chose and continue to choose destiny over despair. Just think about the 3 young Himmelfarb graduates that I mentioned earlier. Honor Shapiro's purpose, his why, was clear. On October 7th, he hurled back 7 live grenades before the 8th took his life, sacrificing himself so his friends could live. For Ben Zussman, serving his country was a privilege. He wrote to his parents before he went back into the army. There's probably no one happier than me right now. I'm grateful for the privilege to protect our beautiful land and the people of Israel. Hirsch Goldberg Poland made meaning out of the unimaginable. In captivity, he taught, he inspired his fellow hostages with Viktor Frankl's words, "He who has a why can bear anyhow." And just this week, freed American Israeli hostage Adnan Alexander, in a story that I'm still trying to wrap my arms around, announced that he is returning to Israel to rejoin his unit, to fight the very terrorists who held him in captivity for 584 days. And he said, and I quote, "Serving Israel is one of the greatest honors of my life. My story does not end with survival. It continues with service." And of course, there is my son, whose eyes I see all of this. When we were in Israel this past March, we stood in a town called Shtula, which I suspect very few of you, unless you were on our trip and unless you spent a lot of time up north, you've ever been to Shtula. It is a small town on the Lebanese border that's been almost entirely evacuated since October 7th. I texted my son to tell him where we were, and his reply sort of stopped me in the moment. He said, "Oh yeah, Shtula." He said, "I slept in the woods there," he wrote. For 8 months after October 7th, he and his tank unit moved from place to place in those very woods, sleeping under the trees in their tanks for 8 months, dodging Hezbollah rockets, doing whatever they could to prepare the ground for the day that Israel would enter Lebanon. It is a strange, disorienting feeling to stand in a place where you know that your son has been at war, to look out from an Israeli overlook, as we did a few kilometers away from Shtula, looking into southern Lebanon, and realize that this is where he spent last Rosh Hashanah, 3 months in his tank as Israel crossed the border, fighting for our people. And as I stood there staring into the expanse of southern Lebanon, I felt the weight of it all. His courage, his sacrifice, his choice to run back to Israel after October 7th. His service is not random. It is not accidental. It is rooted in a deep sense of purpose, a deep sense of why. He knows why he's there. He knows why there must be a Jewish state. And he knows why he must defend that state. And he reminds me of these truths as well. Friends, it's been nearly 8 decades since the Survivor's Talmud was published. 8 decades since the survivors used our sacred text to leave us a message for all time. That life is not random. Life is a call to live, to learn, and to build. And thank you to Menachem Rosensaft, I actually hold in my hand a copy, one of the volumes of this Survivor's Talmud. Menachem, I feel like I'm holding history in my hands here. Jeffrey, this is the work of the hands of the JDC right here, and you can see dedications and inscriptions. I share this story with you because, to me, this book perfectly captures the moment we live in Jewish history. We are, after all, people of the book. For thousands of years, our books have been the vessels through which we tell our story, that we transmit our story, our purpose, our very identity. The Nazis understood this as they destroyed all the libraries, the Jewish libraries of Europe. They knew that how goes the Jewish book, so go the Jews. Leon Wieseltier once put it perfectly. The spines of books, books and spines, Leon. Books are spines, you wrote. Books are the backbone of Jewish history. Our vast library has told our story for generation to generation for thousands of years. And what better way to resurrect a people than by resurrecting their books? For me, the image of the book is not just a metaphor. It is my why. These books, our Jewish library, they taught me my why. They taught me the story of our people. It's an extraordinary miraculous, enduring story of faith and of courage. And because I know that story, I know that I am part of something larger. I have a past. I'm part of a family. And that gives me the sacred obligation to write the next chapter and to pass it on to those who come after me. That's my why. That's it. It defines everything I do as a father, as a rabbi, as a teacher, and as a Jew. Friends, the image of the book is especially powerful on this day when we imagine God opening the books of our lives and we ponder our lives in the coming year. What story will we write? How will we communicate the purpose of our being, our why, to ourselves, to our families, and to the world? Let this Rosh Hashanah be the time when we commit to take the wheel, the day we declare that our lives, our history, our people are not an accident, that history is not adrift. Our people are not merely floating through time. We are here for a reason, and I invite you to choose one or several acts that will root you in your purpose. Number one, learn, study Torah, read Jewish history, read Jewish books, explore our texts and ideas. It has never been easier to do so. Let Jewish wisdom shape your mind and your decisions. Number two, give. Support the people and causes that sustain Jewish life, from families of hostages to soldiers on the front lines to the next generations here at PAS. Three, show up. Just show up. Be present in shul, at minyan, on Shabbat, in moments of joy, in times of grief, so that no one in this community ever feels alone. And number four, speak out. Share your story. Write the letter. Have the hard conversation. Tell and show the world that you are proud to be a Jew and that you believe in the future of Israel and the future of the Jewish people. 4 words, 4 actions, 4 ways to live with meaning, to access your why, and to steer your life. And if we take the wheel, if we claim our destiny with purpose, with faith, and with courage, then like the survivors and those who fight for Israel today, we will not only endure, we will flourish, we will rise, and we will build. And we cannot yet imagine the extraordinary fruits that our lives and our choices will bear. I wish you all a sweet new year, a health-filled new year, a year where we find our purpose, where we find our why, and God willing, a year of shalom. Shana Tova.
Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in shul.